So even to the present day, and people should call this detective and ask him what's going on. If you need his phone number, I even got that. But this is the type of thing, and it happens to this day. He made a big joke out of it. And it's just over and over and over. You know, they make fun of Noreen. They accuse her. In fact, when the pictures came up, there were people accusing Noreen of this. And they didn't know that I also had gotten a couple of these pictures at the same time. So they try to ridicule the parents, number one, or try to put the blame on them so that they can cover it up. So it's a perfect plan that they have, and it works because so far Noreen is the only parent mother that I have ever met that has stood up to these people. And we need more mothers. It's only the mothers that can bring this to a stop.
Okay, now in the second half hour, we're going to spend a lot of time concentrating on when the Johnny Gosch case really heated up, when all these pictures started to surface, and we're going to get into that aspect of the case. We only have a couple minutes before the break. But, Jim, I wanted to mention that when you were investigating, well, your story, and we've documented it point by point, but I'm just going to recap it real quickly. When you finally began to take this investigation to the top levels, having solid evidence, for example, you had solid evidence the former Cardinal Spellman was involved, solid evidence that high-level officials in state and federal government were involved, businessmen, high-level businessmen. When you went with your information to get a search warrant, it was quashed by Morgenthau. In fact, he stole your evidence. And then as the days went on, when you worked with Father Ritter, and the connections with Pope John Paul I and his death, and actually listening to a conversation of the Pope who was killed after 33 days, trying to get some justice. He was then killed 10 days later after he made that call while you were in Father Ritter's office at the Covenant House. Father Ritter trying to get justice himself and then being slandered, libeled, called a pedophile by these people. They told you point blank, you either leave the department or you know what's going to happen to you, and that was the end of it all. And it got to that point after bribe after bribe. They tried to bribe you with $1 million. But isn't it amazing that when you got to the doorstep of Spellman and to the doorstep of these people, somehow the heat was turned up on you, Ritter, and John Paul I was killed? Just a comment. We got a minute.
Yes, and that is the problem. And you'll find many, many police officers, FBI agents, who have done the same thing I have. It's not that I was the Lone Ranger out there. Many, many police, to this day yet, like I just said, when I was in West Des Moines the last time and sat down with the detective, he was just besides himself that he knew he couldn't do anything. And he flat out told me. So I've talked to federal agents in the last year or so who have told me the same thing. He said, Jim, if I take this case or take these cases, you know my career's done. And so we know this is the problem. This is the whole problem. And this is why we need the mothers to stand up and make the fathers and the parents do what they're supposed to do to protect their children.
You know, one question I never asked you, but you had when you were investigating this, and still to this day, you're doing private work, helping Noreen, other parents, try and find their children. Is there a concentrated area in the states they work in, or is this all over the country?
This is all over the country with a few locations that are specific to certain operations. Minneapolis,
Jim?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a break. Let's hold it there so you don't get caught up when the music starts. My guests are Jim Rothstein, former New York police detective, Noreen Gosch. Back 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal. Okay, we are back on the Investigative Journal. My guests are Noreen Gosch, and she's from Des Moines, Iowa. Her story you can find at johnnygosch.com. She also has another website that she will tell you about. And I want to mention this first about Noreen. First of all, Jim Rothstein, who's been investigating pedophilia rings for years, first starting out as a detective in the New York Police Department, now doing it privately after he has been banished for the department for trying to get to the truth and help people recover their children. Noreen is perhaps one of the only mothers that has walked the extra mile here, never backing down to the pressure. And the pressure she's received from higher authorities is amazing. And you know it goes on with other people. Other people crack. They basically, some people, I imagine, have even committed suicide over this. And Jim has talked about that in the past. Now, we have a serious problem, probably what Jim Rothstein calls the biggest terrorist threat in our country. That is the kidnapping of our children. And this pedophilia ring is continuing today. Jim says even worse. And we are now faced with trying to figure out what to do. When we have a media, a group like the Des Moines Register, proposing to get at the truth, and then we go to bigger newspapers, bigger radio stations, TV stations that ignore this problem and give the benefit of the doubt to the government, we have a bigger problem, because Americans really do not rally behind Jim Rothstein and Noreen Gosch, and they're left out in the cold by themselves. And I hope that people listening will contact them, lend their assistance in any way possible, and make sure that it doesn't happen in your community. Noreen, I wanted to get back to Jim, just to answer those last questions, and then we're going to pick up the story where all these photos of Johnny started coming in when he was a child. It must have been heart-wrenching. Let's get back to that in a minute. But Jim, we left off, you were saying that there's certain areas of the country they use for certain pedophilia purposes. Explain that a bit.
Yes, there are a number of locations. We'll start off with New York City. In the New York City area, naturally, because of its size and location, is one of the main centers. You have Washington, D.C., basically because of the politicians and the power that's there. From there, it spreads north. Boston had a major problem. You run through the Schenectady, Rochester, New York area. Then you get into Cleveland, Columbus, Ohio. You have New Orleans. Then you have the Chicago. You have Minneapolis. From Minneapolis, it goes to a place called St. John's, which is in St. Joe, Minnesota. And you head down to Des Moines, and I put Des Moines with Omaha, Nebraska. You have the Denver, Colorado area with the surrounding communities there. But the one part that has not come out before is where the occult part of this settled in a place called Kanab, Utah. Then you have Northern California. There's an area in there that's very much involved. And then you have the part around Los Angeles, Hollywood area, naturally because of what you have in that particular thing where they use these kids, promising them all kinds of stuff. And there's also a connection in Texas. So basically what you have there is the different areas that this focuses on. Although many little areas have what I call like these subcultures that are into it. They're small little areas in small communities many times. And always I like to give an example. When I was up in Island Falls, Maine, I had two priests come to me where a mother came to them, and people had come and wanted to sacrifice her 6-year-old child up there. So we have this throughout the country. And you can follow this across. There's been another detective from New York working with a professor from St. Cloud State in Minnesota that have called and uncovered what's known as the smiley face killers. I used to call that the Interstate 9094, which gets into the occult part, or satanic, whatever you want to call it, that crisscrosses and mixes with this other part. And a lot of that has to do what's known as human compromise, where these children are used to compromise people. So that gives you a quick outlook on just what this is, and it would take a show to describe each one of these.
Okay, back to Noreen. Noreen, the case took a turn when all these photos started to come in. Jim was involved at this point. Let's go back to that point and tell us how that occurred.